Esther chapter 4. Now, as we come into chapter 4, let us think about what we read last week. We have this new character introduced by the name of Haman. And this character, Haman, is raised up by the king, placed above the other officials, and given authority that is recognized and enforced. And then the text also does not leave this man undefined. He is an Agagite from a line that has long stood in opposition to God's people. Now you think about what that means. Here you have this man who has been brought up to this place of authority, this powerful position, and their bloodline has a history against the Jewish people. Now that matters because what follows is not neutral. We know that every time Haman comes before the people, enters into that courtyard, what are the people commanded to do? To bow down before this man. However, there is an issue because here we have Mordecai waiting outside the palace gates. And every time Haman comes through, all the people bow down except for this one man who is a Jew by the name of Mordecai. And he doesn't refuse just because he has this personal agenda against Haman. That's not the reason why. Mordecai doesn't bow because he is a Jew. And he will not give that kind of honor that would conflict with his allegiance to God. Now here's the thing. There are others around who have noticed that every time Haman comes by, and then everyone is bowing down at this man of authority because it has been commanded by way of the king. But there's some in the king's palace that notice Mordecai, this man is not bowing. So what do? They report Mordecai to Haman. So Haman, upon his next visit, as he's walking next to the gate, and he's seeing everyone bow before him, and he looks at Mordecai. And he was like, yeah, they're right. This man is not bowing. And it's at this moment that Haman is filled with this anger. But his anger isn't just directed towards Mordecai. No. Haman knows Mordecai's bloodline. So not only is this anger directed towards Mordecai, he wants the entire Jewish line wiped out throughout the Babylonian Empire. But Mordecai will not bow to this man. But this anger, he doesn't act impulsively, that being Haman. No, he sits with this. And what do I mean by that? Well, they begin casting lots to set a date to where he is going to plan to kill all the Jewish people in one day. Now, we're told it takes about 12 months for this plan to take place, for the lots actually determine what day this is going to happen. And once that specific day is set, what does Haman do? I've got the date by way of casting lots, and what did we learn last week? Who determines every dice that is ever rolled? And that is God, our sovereign Lord, even determines the very dice that are being cast, or sticks, or whatever they are using to cast as lots. God determines that. So think about the next time you play Monopoly. Even that's determined by God. I mean, that's how sovereign our Lord is. So anyway, this day, this time has been set. And it's then Haman brings it before the king. But Haman isn't completely upfront with King Ahasuerus. Because Haman doesn't name the people that he wants to eliminate. He doesn't describe them as Jews. What he does say, though, how he describes them as a people that are scattered throughout the empire, a people that are different, a people that are not aligned with the king's laws. That's how he introduces these people to the king. And it's then the king responds without question. And what does the king do? He gives Haman his signet ring, which means what? I'm giving you the authority to do exactly this. This decree is now authorized by the king. So the decree is written that on this date, every single Jew throughout the empire will be slaughtered, will be annihilated, will be killed. Doesn't matter their age, doesn't matter their gender. None of it matters. If you have Jewish blood flowing through your veins, this day is set for you to be annihilated. So the command is clear. And once it is out, by way of the king, it stands. So now it's made public. It's fixed, and it reaches throughout the entire empire. And do you recall how the chapter closed last week? By way of a celebration. King and Haman sit down and they begin to drink. But as they're drinking, the city is thrown into confusion. I mean, they get word of this by way of this decree. And the city's like, wait, what? What's going on here? On this day, this certain specific time, all these people are going to be eliminated. So the people are marked. And this is where chapter 4 begins. Now, we're going to cover 3 verses at a time, at least in this first little section, okay? Because we've got chapter 4 to cover. We're not getting out of here tonight until we cover chapter 4. That's what the Lord has decreed. We cast lots, and that's what it said. I'm kidding. I'm going to do my best to get through chapter 4. All right, let's start in verse 1. So when Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out to the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. Verse 2, he went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was a great mourning among the Jews with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. So now we're seeing the decree has come into view. It's been sent out. Mordecai learns what has been done, and then he understands the weight of it. And it is crushing. So this isn't a rumor. This isn't something that is uncertain. It has been sent by way of the king, and it is fixed. And Mordecai, he knows what this means. And we can see that in how he responds. I mean, he tears his clothes. He puts on sackcloth. He covers himself in ashes. And those aren't small details. We can't overlook this. What does this mean? These are visible signs of grief and distress, a kind of response that belongs to loss, that belongs to judgment, to something that cannot be treated lightly. That's the state that Mordecai's in. And here's the thing, Mordecai doesn't hide this. I mean, he's going out into the public realm dressed in this manner. But not only is he dressed this way, but he's crying out. It is loud. It is a bitter yell. So it's not controlled, nor is it restrained. And you think about, how would you respond? Finding out that a day has been set where your bloodline is going to be wiped out. And he goes all the way up to the king's gate because he can't go any further. Not by way in which he is dressed. He is not permitted to enter in sackcloth because the gate is part of the king's court. It's a place ordered by the authority of the throne where things are meant to reflect control and stability. And that's not what Mordecai is reflecting at this moment. He's crushed. So there's no visible mourning inside the king's court. It must be kept outside. And you think about this contrast. Here you have the Jewish people hearing about this, and they're weeping and they're mourning. But at the center of the kingdom, what do we have? We have the authority of the king, where it seems he is standing undisturbed. Undisturbed. Yes, I just agreed to wipe out a people group. But just outside, there is grief. But because Mordecai cannot enter, his grief must remain outside. But what we're seeing is this same response. It is making its way throughout all the provinces. All the Jewish people are dressed in sackcloth, covered in ashes, crying out. The people understand what has been set against them. And this continues. And as we're reading this, we're sitting here and we know how this story ends. I get that. But in that moment in time, they're crying out to their sovereign Lord to rescue them. Yet there's something else that they understand. They don't know how this is going to play out for them, but what they do know is that God has made a promise to the Jewish people that this bloodline is going to be the bloodline that brings about the Savior. They have faith in that. They have confidence in that promise. Now, let's look at verses 4, and we're going to kind of collect a lot of this together here. So, verse 4 starts, when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. Let me pause for a moment here, okay? Because, yes, Queen Esther is the queen, but she does not know the plan of the king nor the plan of Haman. And you may be thinking, wait, but she's the queen. Listen, this isn't a normal relationship. This isn't a normal marriage where they're having dinner with one another, talking about the decrees of the day. At this point, she hasn't seen the guy in 30 days. So she doesn't understand what he has done. So she gets word that her cousin who has raised her is out in sackcloth covered in ashes. She's like, what's going on here? So then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So not only does she send Mordecai clothes, because she's thinking at this point, okay, maybe something's happened and this is all he has, so I'm going to send him a change of clothes. Don't know where she got the clothes from. Maybe there was a gap inside the king's palace. Anyway, so she gets some new clothes for him and she sends them to him. But Mordecai's like, I'm not taking these clothes. You don't understand. So when she sends Hathach not only to bring the clothes, but it's then that Mordecai tells Hathach what is taking place. Look at verse 6. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Continuing 7, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of all the people. Okay, so this scene in these verses that we just covered, we're seeing a shift from Mordecai to Esther and her learning about what has happened. And it's here that she is given the understanding, the decree of what the king has sent out. And we see this by way of Hathach going and have this conversation with Mordecai. Mordecai refuses the clothes. Mordecai even gives this eunuch, Hathach, the decree. And again, the question is, wait a minute. How does the king's eunuch not know about this decree? It wasn't any of his business. That the king and Haman could do whatever they wanted to do. They didn't have to include his wife, nor the other concubines, nor did he have to include the other eunuchs. So all of this is a surprise to them. They don't have a daily paper. There's no 24-hour news networks. How wonderful would that be today? To just breathe, right? So here she is getting all this information from Mordecai. This is the reason why Mordecai isn't going to change. It's the reason why he's staying in this sackcloth. Again, she's in the palace. She's protected, at least for now, and he's in this outside world. So we see Mordecai laying all of this out to her, but this is where it gets dangerous. And we can't look over this part either. Because what Mordecai is telling Hathach, I'm going to give you all this information, and I need you to take this information back to the queen so that she can go to the king. And we need to, once again, take our view of marriage, take our view of the relationships of marriage, and we need to chunk it out the window because that's not their relationship. Look at verse 9. So Hathach gets all this information, even brings back the clothes that Mordecai refuses, has the decree, and Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, pay close attention here, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court, very important, without being called, even if it's your wife, if you have not been called, what happens? There is but one law. And what is that? To be put to death. Except, and this is the only exception, right? This is what it says, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. So the golden scepter is going to determine whether or not you live and are able to come and see the king. But as for me, this is Esther telling Hathach, listen, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. He's not seen his wife in 30 days. Okay, are we grasping what's being said here? She understands what's been decreed. She also understands what her cousin who has raised her is asking her to do. This very may well cost you your life. As a matter of fact, you may not even be able to get the words out of your mouth before he strikes you dead. No pressure, Esther. None whatsoever. Either our bloodline gets wiped out, or you take this to him and you may be killed. I mean, think about what he did to his queen when she didn't come and dance before all the men. Now let's make this clear. You must be invited. No one goes uninvited. Not a man, not a woman. And if you do, Scripture's laid this out, it means death. Unless the king extends his scepter, there is no exception. And there's been no sign given to her to come and visit the king. So from her position, this isn't an opportunity that opens up naturally. There is no opportunity there for her from the human perspective. And yet, even here, the situation is not outside of what God is ordering. From the human perspective, the door appears shut. The risk is real. But you think about this, all right? You think about how God is working. Think about the timing, the position that she has been placed in. And what is being asked of her are not disconnected from the mighty sovereign Lord's purpose. Of all people to be queen at this time, it is a Jewish woman. Out of all the virgins in the land, of all the beautiful virgins in the land, here she is. So what stands before her now is not only the weight of the decree that has been sent out, but the cost of responding to it. And just from the verses we read, she understands this. She gets this. So this is the reality that she's wrestling with, right? Okay. Let's look at verse 12 through 14. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. So she's sending this eunuch back and forth. That's how this communication is taking place. Then Mordecai told the eunuch to reply, tells her how to reply to Esther. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. Oh, that's not good news. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. We're going to touch on that. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So now the eunuch's had this conversation with Mordecai. The eunuch tells Mordecai what Esther has said. And Mordecai understands the risk that he's placing his at this point, his daughter in. He doesn't argue with the eunuch that this isn't real, that this isn't a possibility. Instead, he answers it directly, does he not? He tells her not to think that her position will set her apart from what has been decreed. Listen, if you think by way of you staying silent, and this day comes, and he finds out that you are a Jew, do you think the king is going to go, okay, well, we're going to kill everyone except my queen? Nope. Mordecai's just being honest with her. He's still going to kill you. So if the decree stands and she doesn't go before the king, she is still going to die. And then he says something that becomes central, right? It hits. If she keeps silent, and this is so important, even if she keeps silent, and this day is brought about, what does Mordecai say? I know our sovereign Lord is still going to deliver this bloodline. So even though many of us may be wiped out, it's not going to ruin the plan of God. And how does he know that? Because that's the promise that God made. And God does not break a promise. He cannot and he will not. So you see the faith of Mordecai, even in this position of his daughter facing death, and very likely him facing death, all of his friends, his relatives facing death, at least in Babylon. But he understands this bloodline is going to be saved. And then he may be asking, well, then what's it matter if Esther even goes forward with this if he has all this confidence? You do not know the way in which God is going to work. You do not know how God is going to use your choice, your ability to move forward with His plan. We don't know that. So yes, it may be through you, Esther, but if it's not, His plan is still going to move forward. Sometimes this is a problem with our reformed little minds, is we sit here and think, well, God's got a plan. I don't have to do anything. No. No. We have been decreed, we have been commanded to obey His word. How is He going to use you through that process? Good thing Esther doesn't think that way. I mean, this is a real consequence tied to her response. Wait, but don't we always say that God's decreed all things, He's sovereign over all things? Yes, but we don't know how His plan is going to work or how He's going to use you. So quit being so arrogant. I'm speaking to myself too, by the way. I sounded kind of harsh, but this guy too. And so we're seeing Mordecai, he does not know or claim to know how God is going to work through this, but he knows the promises of God. And he knows He'll hold to those promises. But again, I'm going to say this. Her position is not random. She has not been brought to this point out of chance or circumstances. God's purpose will stand. But she has been placed where she now must respond. Okay. Let's dive into verse 15. We made it, guys. We made it. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai. All right. Here's what's going to happen. Verse 16, you go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and you hold a fast on my behalf. And do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. We see that 3 there, don't we? I and my young women will also fast as you do. You see what she's doing? She's calling the people to pray. This is something else that we lack in this community. That focus on prayer, coming together to pray, and the power of prayer. It's happening right here. We'll also fast as you do. Then, after 3 days, 3 nights of fasting and prayer, then I'll make my way to the king uninvited. Though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. She understands the risk. She understands that her life may be taken from her. She understands what's being asked of her, and she answers it. How does she answer it? Will you pray? I'm going to be praying. I want you all to be praying, where we see that prayer works here in these verses. And listen, even if it doesn't turn out the way in which it does, prayer works no matter what. He hears the body of believers crying out to him. So they're fasting. 3 days, 3 nights, they're praying. And you think about it, it's not because the situation has changed. It hasn't. She still has to go to the king uninvited. The risk hasn't been removed. It's in spite of it. She understands what she needs to do. She may very well be, and we know that she is because we've read ahead, but she may very well be the tool in which God uses to save this bloodline. But then we see just how much she understands this. If I perish, I perish. And she's not resigning to this. No, this is the resolve. She's not presuming the outcome. She is stepping forward knowing the cost. Because that's what faith does, oh church. And then we have Mordecai responding and doing exactly as she has said. Another cliffhanger, but that's how the chapter closes. Again, this situation isn't resolved. But let me close with this, okay? Because I think Christ always needs to be brought back in some way, shape, or form. So even in this story, what stands here is not complete deliverance yet. We're going to see a form of deliverance, yes. We're seeing someone stepping forward, as Esther is doing on behalf of others, knowing that it may cost her life. We can all see where this is going, right? We see this foreshadowing of Esther. And it's not because Esther completes what is needed, but because she shows the shape of it. Because we all know there is one who would come and not only risk his life, but completely give it. And this one is not uncertain of the outcome. He knows exactly how it's going to end for him on this earth when he takes his last breath. So we're not just going to see a moment of deliverance at the cross. We're going to see the completion of deliverance there. We even have Esther preparing to step forward before the presence of the king, not knowing if she will be received. But Christ comes before the Father, having taken on what belongs to his people, and he secures what they could not. So what we're seeing in the book of Esther is not the complete and final answer, but it points to the one who is. And because of him, what is uncertain here is made certain at the cross. Deliverance does finally come. And it comes fully and finally in Christ. And I hope we're able to see this throughout the book of Esther as it's pointing us to the one who truly and fully rescues. All right. We'll close there.